The Volkswagen Beetle, that small, lovable car shaped like a bug, was once an essential icon of the hippie movement, children's cartoons, and even wedding getaways. With millions sold worldwide, it's remembered as the car of love, peace, and simplicity in an increasingly industrialized age. But behind that charming face lies a dark past that few are willing to confront. The Beetle was not born in peace. It was a product of totalitarianism. It wasn't designed for freedom. It was once a tool of propaganda. And it wasn't always beloved. It was once ridiculed, nearly erased from history. How did a car, once linked to Hitler, become a global symbol of freedom? How did it survive war, rejection, and rise to the top of automotive history? In this video, we'll uncover the shocking and deeply conflicted truth behind one of the world's most beloved cars, the Volkswagen Beetle. In the mid-1930s, Adolf Hitler wasn't just dreaming of European domination. He also envisioned a modern, orderly society where every German citizen could own a car. But the vehicle he imagined was far more than just transportation. It was a political instrument. In 1934, Hitler personally ordered engineer Ferdinand Porsche to design a Volkswagen, a people's car. It had to be cheap, easy to repair, fuel-efficient, and capable of carrying a family of 4 across the newly built Autobahn. Technically, it was a noble goal. But in reality, Hitler didn't just want personal mobility. He wanted a living propaganda symbol for Nazi Germany. The car was officially named the KDF Wagen, short for Kraft durch Freude, or Strength Through Joy, a colorful propaganda program meant to convince citizens of a bright future under authoritarian rule. The car was meant to represent prosperity and the state's ability to grant happiness. Starting in 1938, German citizens were encouraged to set aside part of their weekly wages as installment payments toward a future KDF Wagen. Believing they were investing in modern mobility, over 300,000 people signed up. But this turned out to be one of the most blatant scams in automotive history. The harsh truth? Not a single one of those 300,000 buyers ever received the car they paid for. When World War II broke out in 1939, the entire production line at the Wolfsburg factory was redirected for military use. Instead of building civilian vehicles, the factory shifted to assembling Kubelwagens and Schwimmwagens for the battlefield. All the money the public had contributed, millions of Reichsmarks, was diverted to fuel the Nazi war machine. The savings contracts became worthless, and no compensation was ever offered. During the war, only a few dozen Beetle prototypes were built for testing, and none reached the hands of consumers. During the war, only a few dozen Beetle prototypes were built for testing purposes, none of which ever reached the customers. The rest of the Wolfsburg plant, originally intended to produce the people's car, had become a logistical hub for warfare, and also the backdrop for one of the darkest chapters in modern industrial history. By 1940, with severe labor shortages, the factory turned to forced labor. These weren't skilled workers, but prisoners of war, civilians from occupied territories, and most chillingly, inmates from the Nazi concentration camp system. They were forced to work under inhumane conditions, starvation, physical abuse, no medical care, and exhausting shifts in unsafe environments. Few realized that Wolfsburg had its own satellite camp directly linked to the concentration camps, located right on the factory grounds. This wasn't just a production site, it was a direct extension of an organized system of oppression. Tragically, for decades after the war, this truth remained hidden. It wasn't until the 1990s, under mounting public and human rights pressure, that Volkswagen formally acknowledged its role and established a compensation fund for surviving laborers. It wasn't until the 1990s, under public pressure and scrutiny from human rights organizations, that Volkswagen officially acknowledged its past and created a compensation fund for surviving forced laborers. But nearly 50 years earlier, there was a moment when both the company and the Beetle itself seemed doomed to be buried under the rubble of war. After the Allies defeated Nazi Germany, the Wolfsburg plant was left abandoned, heavily damaged by bombs. It was filled with debris, broken machinery, and unexploded ordnance. No one believed the site had any value, and even fewer saw any future in a strange little car originally built for Hitler. That is, until a British Army officer named Ivan Hurst arrived at the scene in 1945. Hurst saw what others overlooked: a production line that could be revived and a simple car design with potential in a post-war world. He repaired the machinery, cleaned up the factory, and convinced British authorities to order 20,000 Beetles for occupying forces. Even more remarkably, the British actually offered to give away the factory and the Beetle design to Ford for free. But the American company flatly rejected it, dismissing the car as a weird little toy that would never succeed. Yet it was this single man's decision, and one corporation's indifference, that unexpectedly gave the Beetle a second chance, a chance that would change automotive history. When the first Beetles rolled off the line after the war, no one called it a Beetle. To Volkswagen, the car's official name was Type 1, a dry, technical designation with no charm, no emotion. Even in official documents, that label remained for years, as if Volkswagen wanted to keep the car distanced from its complicated past. But the public had other ideas. Drivers didn't see a Type 1. They saw a round, quirky, lovable shape that resembled a bug. And so the nickname Beetle emerged organically, passed from person to person, crossing language and cultural boundaries. What's remarkable is that Volkswagen resisted the name for years. They preferred to stick with the formal, numbered model codes, trying to control the branding. But ultimately, they couldn't stop the force of public sentiment. People called it the Beetle, magazines called it the Beetle, and soon the entire world did too. In Brazil, it became known as Fusca. In France, Coccinelle. In Mexico, Vocho. Regardless of the language, it was no longer a nameless product. It had become part of daily life. But what kept the Beetle in the hearts of millions around the world wasn't just its cute name, but how it worked. Simple, rugged, and entirely different from anything else on the road at the time. Unlike typical cars that relied on water-based cooling systems, with radiators, hoses, and all the risks of leaks, the Beetle was engineered with a rear-mounted, air-cooled engine. No coolant, no pipes, no risk of freezing or boiling over in extreme climates. This made the Beetle nearly bulletproof in the eyes of many. From freezing mountain passes to sun-scorched deserts, the car kept moving without complex parts or hard-to-find replacements. In remote areas, people drove their Beetles for decades without ever seeing a mechanic. In some remote places, people continued using their Beetles for decades without ever taking them to a professional garage. But perhaps the strangest story ever told about this car has nothing to do with durability, and everything to do with its alleged ability to float. It sounds like an exaggerated myth, but the truth is, in numerous documented cases from the 1940s and 1950s, Beetles really did float across flooded roads or small rivers, long enough for drivers to escape safely. Volkswagen never intended this, but the tightly sealed body, rounded shape, curved undercarriage, and lightweight construction accidentally created a temporary boat-like effect. Some experts call it passive buoyancy, not controllable, but surprisingly real. This odd feature traces back to the Beetle's wartime lineage. During World War II, the same platform was used to build the Schwimmwagen, a fully amphibious military vehicle. That attention to water sealing partially carried over into civilian Beetles, purely by design coincidence. Of course, no one recommends driving your Beetle into a lake, but those bizarre survival stories helped cement its legend. The Beetle wasn't just a car, it was a machine built to endure. And strangely enough, that almost indestructible reputation laid the foundation for one of the most remarkable automotive market conquests of the 20th century. While other car makers raced ahead with technology, styling, or horsepower, Volkswagen took a different path, barely changing anything. The Beetle kept its rounded shape, minimal interior, and modest but efficient engine. What seemed like a weakness became its hidden strength. In 1972, the 15 millionth Beetle rolled off the line, officially surpassing the Ford Model T as the most produced car in history. It wasn't a flashy trendsetter, but the result of a consistent philosophy: simplicity, durability, accessibility. In America, where the Beetle had once been dismissed as a weird little toy, it quietly exploded in popularity. At its peak, Volkswagen was selling over 500,000 Beetles per year in the United States alone, a staggering number for a tiny import that broke every traditional American car standard. But part of what made Americans fall in love with it had nothing to do with speed or luxury. It was about serviceability. The Beetle was a car you could repair yourself at home, using basic hand tools and a little patience. No electronic sensors, no complicated wiring harnesses, no central computer to decode. Everything was mechanical, visible, and within reach. Most famously, the engine could be removed entirely in just 15 minutes, with just a few wrenches and no need for a lift. For many people, this was the first car they ever disassembled, fixed, and reassembled by themselves. Auto repair schools across the US once used the Beetle as the go-to model for teaching basic mechanical principles. For hobbyists and restorers, it became a steel textbook, easy to read, easy to understand, easy to work with. After more than 6 decades on the road and over 21 million units produced, the Beetle finally had to say goodbye. On July 30th, 2003, at Volkswagen's Puebla plant in Mexico, the last classic Beetle, dubbed the Ultima Edición, rolled off the assembly line. Painted in a soft pastel blue with elegant cloth seats, the car was completed with special care and reverence. It wasn't just a commercial product, it was a farewell ceremony for a global icon. After the event, the car was immediately sent to Volkswagen's museum in Germany for permanent preservation. In Mexico, the Beetle, known as Vocho, had become deeply woven into daily life, serving as taxis, family cars, and reliable workhorses. Its presence on the bustling streets became part of the national memory. So when production finally ended, it wasn't just the end of a model. It was an emotional moment for an entire generation. Few cars have ever lasted this long, both physically and spiritually. From an abandoned propaganda project to a beloved everyman's vehicle, the Beetle completed a full circle in history. And on the day that journey ended, many shed tears. The Volkswagen Beetle was more than just a vehicle. It was living proof that history can be reborn. Born in darkness, it rolled through war, then became a symbol of peace and simplicity. A car once ridiculed, ultimately adored by millions around the world. The Beetle wasn't the fastest, strongest, or most advanced, But that's exactly what made it real, relatable, and timeless. If you have memories of the Beetle, don't hesitate to share them in the comments. And if you enjoy car history told with depth, honesty, and heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story.